Just move it a little bit closer.
Okay,
like
perfect.
So I'm checking in here. So guys, welcome back to another live session. We are with three-time Olympian Jennifer Rhines. Jen, thanks so much for coming
Thanks
on the
so much
show.
for having me.
So you've been on 15 U.S. national teams.
Yes.
The Olympics 3 separate times.
Yes.
What a career. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I enjoyed every minute of it.
That's cool. So you went to college at Villanova
Yes.
with my wife.
Yes.
And you guys trained together. You were a little bit older than her, but tell the backstory so folks can kind of...
So one of my first runs with Deena, because she's an amazing endurance athlete, was we had this 8-mile tempo run. And I was defending NCAA champ individually and we as a team. So I was like, and we had this new girl coming in. I'm like, go out for an 8-mile tempo. And I'm like, wow, she's really pushing the pace. Like, I'm not really in charge here today. And then I'm like, I'm just hanging on. And finally I was like, I got to let her go.
Yeah.
And she just like ripped it. And it was still my fastest 8-mile tempo, like all college career.
Crazy.
So yeah, that was one of my first runs with Deena, but yeah, it was awesome getting to know her that season. Yeah, it was fun.
At what point did you say, all right, I'm just going to back off? Like, was it halfway?
Past the point I should have,
Okay.
because basically like one of those things when you're young, you're like, I'm going to grind it out and hang in there. And I was already running like too hard, like race effort. And then it was like, you're going to have to let this go.
Can't sustain it.
Yeah, I don't remember at what point, but let the ego get in the way a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah. But
do you think
yeah.
that happens and does that lead to like an overtraining state when we just keep pushing?
It definitely does. Yeah. And for me, fortunately, that was kind of like a rare occasion. I would say like a little bit smarter than that, even like as a collegiate athlete. But it's definitely one of the things over the years that's helped me is having that perspective. And so I trained like side by side with Deena Kastor, who's American record holder in the marathon, Olympic medalist, and she's just a stronger endurance athlete than me. But I was able to like adapt and understand like where my limits were, but still be able to, use the excitement and, companionship of training together. So I think that's something that you kind of like learn along the way, and you can lose a lot if you don't learn that.
Totally. Because that kind of digs you into a hole that's hard to get out
Exactly.
of.
And, and that's what coaches are there for and other teammates and mentors. But it's definitely, that if you do that day in and day out and also if you don't have good feel, tracking metrics can help, even your basic heart rate, your HRV, but those things can help kind of rein you in if you're not someone who has a good feel of how your body's doing.
So I know you're getting into heart rate variability and stuff. You've been using that. Was it HRV4 training? Was that what you were
Yes,
using?
that was the app that I've been using past couple of years. And it didn't, I was using it when I had like the iPhone 6. It didn't work quite as well with my new phone. So I've been off of using it, but ordered the Oura Ring back in August. So I'm looking forward to having that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see if that also just tracks with how I feel about my sleep, or if I kind of or if I don't have feel for that. So I'm excited.
Totally. But you were saying
Excited to
for
get
a long time, I mean, your professional career has spanned, over 20 years at this point?
Yes, it's been basically since I finished school in 96 and decided I definitely wanted to run professionally. So 96 to 2018. So I would say about 20 years. I mean, I'm 44 now. I'm definitely not really in the elite, scene anymore. So I would say I was able to stay there for about 20 years.
And using just like heart rate, resting heart rate, and then just how you feel. I mean, because all these biometrics that we have now, heart rate variability, I mean, we have sleep scores and all these different things, were not available at that point. We didn't know about heart rate variability and overtraining. So what I heard you just say there is you really kind of trusted your own intuition. Yeah,
I think I definitely, I've always trusted my instincts. I have good instincts. And just learning, since I've done it for so long, I know for myself where those lines are. And I'll still cross them occasionally. I've had small periods of like adrenal fatigue, but not so far that, it's not that hard to reboot and get back on track. But especially as I got probably the last 5 or 6 years, you can kind of feel yourself going down that slope and then know to pull it back. But I think I had, always had good coaches around me, like my husband Terrence. When he started, he was an elite marathoner and became professional running coached me since 2005. And before that, I had Matt Centrowitz Sr., whose son won the Olympic medal in the 1500 in 2016. And Matt was a total instinct guy, and that's kind of like probably why we work well together.
Interesting.
But I think that's something that helped me with the longevity was, even though we didn't have as many metrics, just like being able to dial in to how I was feeling. And I'm by nature, like I'm always analyzing detail. I studied engineering, so it's kind of like I'm always cataloging all those little things.
That's super interesting. But you're kind of into the metaphysical side. So do you kind of trust your premonition and intuition more than, I guess what I'm trying to tease out for people is what separates a 20 plus year professional career in running from those who maybe have the same athletic ability but didn't make it as long, or didn't last as long, or didn't perform at that level? Is it part of the intuition part, or did they train not effectively? Was it mind state? Like what?
I think it's a huge combination. Like for me personally, I think I have good intuition. I've always trusted it, and I've been open to using kind of both metrics and scientific data and reaching out to an intuitive who will help me. So I've kind of, I think, used all different tools to put myself together, basically.
At what point did you use the intuitive?
Even I was a little bit skeptical, but my husband went and saw him back in 2000. And it's funny because my husband went for a session. He was like a friend of a friend in New York. And he said to him, a little background, I'd been having trouble with this side stitch on my left side.
What's a stitch?
Like a cramp.
Okay. When you're training?
It would only be at when you're really digging it at the hardest part of the race. So it rarely happened in training, but it popped up in a couple races and they still went well, but I knew I was losing a little bit of where I could have been. So it was Olympic year, so it was something I was concerned about because obviously my worst fear would be I'm in contention to make the Olympic team and I get this cramp and I lose the seconds that I'm, can't make up at the end or can't lose. So it was just something that, I'm I got to sort this out. I'd seen some physios. Nothing had really made it click. And our friend, the intuitive, said, your wife really needs to stop drinking coffee. And even though I'd been skeptical of this whole thing, I wasn't as certainly dialed into nutrition there. I just stopped drinking coffee when he said that. So I took that to heart. That he was tapping into that. I needed to hear it, and it basically I think it was a whole body acidity type of thing. And I didn't have the stitch. Didn't have the stitch at the Olympic trials. Made the team.
Wow.
Isn't
that amazing?
And then basically from that point I started learning a lot more on my own, and just being open to tuning into those kind of things.
So, because you're studying this now, you're reading a book on metaphysics and stuff, how do you think that's working? Have you thought about the deeper level? How would this one person know that perhaps the coffee is affecting your acidity or whatever, and that's affecting your performance?
I guess since I've worked with many different types of physios, therapists, whatnot. I think if someone's open into tapping into whatever's out there to help you, then they're going to be able to hear what you need to hear right now. So that's kind of how I've always looked at it.
Interesting.
So I think for me and I said, some of the other athletes I've trained with, I've been open, to using all these different types of tools to make myself better, basically.
And whereas in contrast, some people get stuck in a rut maybe and just do what other people tell them to do or what's been used historically, and you're kind of diving into this, and also you're into keto as well, which is kind of new for that world.
Right.
So part of that, your success is having an open mind.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Yes. And when I first, I was mentioning you beforehand, kind of the first guy, his name's Hamish Hurley, that really got me into all the nutrition side of things. At that time, we also had, his girlfriend was an intuitive at the time. And so for me, what worked perfectly was him writing down a plan, and she would just tweak a couple things. Because at the time I'd said, I feel sensitive in the sun right now. I don't normally feel like this. He was like, okay, we're going to add astaxanthin into the mix of your supplements. And then, when she kind of looked at it, she's like, I think we need to double that. Wow. So that's me personally, I've been open to there's the science, coming from the science side, and then maybe someone else dialing that. That's how I look at dialing it in individually, kind of either through muscle testing, my husband can do muscle testing, or through an intuitive who just is this is, what I think, what I feel. And even using people just like I said, kind of realizing, they're going to tell you something that you need to hear right now that's going to like change your direction or just open, something to the way you haven't been looking at it.
Most engineers don't think like this. I think it's pretty remarkable.
I think I have an odd combination of practicality and the other side.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I mean, it's great to have that open mind. I think everything's so connected. I mean, sometimes like just a friend of mine, I was thinking about him last night. I woke up and got a text from him this morning. He was like, "Hey, how you doing, bud?" And so there is this awareness. And I think if people are more open to that idea that we're connected, energetic beings, it's a unique aspect of your life. And so all these different people that you bump into, if instead of like considering that like a burden or a stress or this traffic jam or whatever, like look at that as maybe that's protecting you or preventing you from,
right.
So it's a unique way to look at life. But a lot of people have this logical side, left brain, and they don't like aren't open to it. So it's really cool to hear that you've leveraged that thinking to propel your career as a professional runner, which is awesome.
Thanks. And I think sometimes, that also helps you get to like the root of what you need to work on right now. Like I see my acupuncturist right now, named Heidi Fearon. She is a great acupuncturist, but she'll also be, kind of tapping into some other things. So what I like is I think that helps you find the direction you need to go to fix something. So if I'm weak in a certain area, if, she's like, I feel like this is emotional, I think we need, throw something out there, maybe think about that, work on that. Because we could go the other direction and just say maybe it's nutritional, and you'd be kind of spinning your wheels, so I like using just all different types of things to kind of get to the root of what needs to be done, right now.
And address it from so many different angles.
Right.
And you use that thinking to also propel your career, because talk about like after college, you were working and training, and like what happened?
Yeah, so after school, I got a small running contract, but I just wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and so I worked at a company called the Vanguard Group, mutual fund company, and I'd studied engineering, but basically I was in finance because they were known to kind of be runner friendly. Like you'll be able to like kind of, you have to work your day, but then you can take off and get your training in, and I knew a couple other kind of like professional runners who had worked there, so I worked there, but my first year out of school, in addition to just adapting to a new coach, I realized I was just spinning my wheels. Like I wasn't advancing, I was still basically working an entry-level job because I wasn't like willing to put in any extra time. Like I was taking off to the track, and I was kind of running mediocre, and just realized I wasn't doing either thing well. And then I did actually lose my running contract. I got cut. So that kind of, sometimes with me, I find I need that that push,
Hammer.
that dramatic thing happening to push me and to make a decision. So I realized I wasn't doing either thing well. So I went part-time with work so I could focus more on running. And then as soon as I did that, I went down to this race in Jacksonville, Florida, and I won. It was like my first professional win. It was a U.S. championship. The favorite was sick, so she pulled out, so I was able to like kind of take advantage of that. Adidas happened to be there because they were the sponsor of the race, so I showed up unsponsored, and they were like, we didn't know you're unsponsored. So that's kind of how I ended up with Adidas. So yeah, it all like worked out for the best. And then like 6 months later, I left the job. And yeah, it was funny because then the exit interview, the woman interviewing me was like, and it's, you're welcome to come back anytime. Most people come back. And I was like, I'm not coming back.
Isn't that funny? But that's unique that you got the contract before quitting. So, a lot of like entrepreneurs or people that are trying to make a lifestyle change, and they know maybe like deep down that the job that they're working at is not right for them. There's people on the internet that say you just got to pivot and change right now. But I think like, you waited, it was a little bit safer, like, and so you weren't, so if you just quit with no running contract, then you might have thought that, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to be a professional runner.
Right. And I think probably that's like also reflects on my nature is I'm like that. Another reason I had such a long career is I'm just, a fairly steady person, not super high highs, not super low lows. So that was that practical side of me, I think, balancing it out. Like, it's fine. You need to pick a direction, but you also have to have a plan.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
You were talking about the balance there. And one thing that we were talking about offline is like throughout your career, you've always maintained your period and normal menstrual cycles. And I think that ability to recover from intense training sessions. So let's talk about that. It's very common for endurance athletic like individuals that participate in endurance events, especially women, to lose their period. I know for me, like my testosterone dropped dramatically when I was bike racing at a high level. So what do you attribute that to?
I think because over the years, I never like really restricted calories. Like I was saying back, being in college, high school in the 90s, it was all high carb, low fat. So it may not have been the perfect diet, but I was able, to kind of thrive that way. And I was, basically always ate a ton of food. Was never like really focusing on. For me, I didn't have to focus on like losing weight. It kind of just happened naturally, say for the peak of the season. And I think that I would basically just start cutting out like sugar. I'd be like, oh, I normally have, some treats, and now it's more serious time of the season. So I was essentially cutting in sugar and carbs, but not super intentionally. But I think just not having that restriction and having, being also, even though I trained hard, having time off, I always, like a lot of runners don't like to take a break.
Yeah.
And I took my break pretty seriously, as did like most of the other athletes I trained with. So I think being cyclical with that and just cyclical with the training, because we would have phases where, I'm going to train hard for the fall, but I'm not like worried about anything else. I'm not worried about my weight. I'm not worried about this or that. And also, as we mentioned offline, I've thought about this because there are a lot of women that I've worked with on nutrition, but it's not quite clicking. It's like they've lost their period, they haven't gotten it back, even though they're eating healthier, and stress is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I was thinking, well, why, sometimes my job was stressful, like championship season was stressful, but I really enjoyed it and I thrived at that part of the season. But also I think just making that, realizing this is what I want to do. And I felt like every day, I knew what my intention was and I wasn't questioning. Like realized I was kind of a single purpose person and embraced that. And so there was no stress in, should I be doing something else? Or I didn't really have these other things I wanted to do, and some people just have, multiple passions. And for me, I was like, right now running is my passion. So there was very little stress in that. So it was just like kind of, I know what my game plan is and get up and execute that every day. And there's not a lot of stress in that.
Such a great point. I mean, do you think that mental stress is kind of underappreciated in terms of how it can affect physical performance? I mean, there's a book over there. I just got it used yesterday. I read it a long time ago. My stepmom introduced me to it, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And in the chapter about like medical and so forth, they Stanford University has done some studies about anxiety and stress in people that have had heart attacks. And they had them in a very, anxiety-invoking situation, and their ejection fraction and all the physiology of stress, like really had a profound impact on their cardiovascular system. So what you're alluding to right there is maybe, if you're unsure if you should be a runner or an athlete or whatever, you got all these other things going on, it's probably going to affect your performance, and then you're not going to recover right.
No, that definitely happens, and I've seen that in past training partners and other athletes, and I mean I just think those are things that we need to address and sort through, and because it does have a huge impact on your health.
Interesting.
And people get flustered because you're trying so hard in training, and it's like, why aren't I recovering?
Yeah.
So it's like
train harder.
Yeah, it's like, and that makes it worse. But it's like it definitely is addressing that whole picture.
So what would you attribute your ability to really narrow down on this goal and say, you know what, I'm going to commit to running and see this thing through and go to the Olympics 3 different times? Like what, how did you come to that point? Like if someone is right now kind of undecided, maybe they have multiple talents in their business or they're not really sure how do you just say, you know what, this is what I'm going to do?
Well, and that's one thing I think it was a bit easy for me because that was the thing I was most passionate about was running. So it was easy for me to just commit to doing that. And also, I was accepting of I am not going to have a lot of money right away. Who knows if I'll ever have, make that, that wasn't like my first focus was make an Olympic team. And I think I've always had the belief in yourself is huge. I just always, even when I was younger in high school, I just was like, well, I'm going to win a state title. And my coach was kind of like, oh, well, let's
cowboy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's, for me, it was just, I like knowing that that's what I want to do. And because I've trained with other athletes that have a passion for music and they have this business they want to start and they do want to run too. But for me, it was like, right now, this is what I want to do. So
That's
it was
unique.
kind of just right. I almost say it's, I can't really put myself in someone else's position who has these 3 or 4 things bouncing around. Because for me, it was like, this is it. And then right now for me, I'm kind of transitioning out of that, and I'm like kind of figuring it out. Like, because I know it's in the health and wellness world, but specifically, I'm still kind of like figuring that out.
Yeah. For coaching and everything along
Right,
those
for
lines.
coaching and advising and speaking.
Totally. It's got to be tough because your identity is wrapped in running. And I think that's what makes people, make it a lifetime goal of being fit, physically fit. Like some people think they look in the mirror, I'm fat. I'm always going to be fat. I've always been fat. But I think for fit people, they look in the mirror and they behave, they believe, like you just said, they have the belief that they're a fit person. They know that they can get in shape if they're out of shape, or they know the steps, right? So do you think that identity is part of that too? Like you identify with being a runner, so you behave like a runner, you train, this is what runners do. Do you think that identity is wrapped into achieving these goals at all, or?
I definitely think it is. I think like that's also something for someone like me, like with having just a single focus and being a professional runner for so long, you want to make sure but you don't see that as your only identity, as like part of your identity. Because I think that's something I learned as I got older, because it's so easy for me to see now. Like when I see young athletes getting so upset after a race, it's like, it's just a race.
It's one race, yeah.
I mean, and I understand because I've done it for so long, what, you're putting into it, even like say at a young age. But, it just makes me sad when I see like, say, high school kids or college age in tears on the phone after a race, because it's like, it's not like who you are, it's something you do.
Yeah.
Because in the elite world, because because it is your job and you spend so much time, and even if you work another job, but it's still that important to you, it's like you still have to maintain that perspective that if I have a bad race, I'm not a bad person. It's something that I've worked for, and it's disappointing, but it's still, it's not me. So I think as you get older, I think it's much easier to see that. But when you're in the moment, because even for me, I just remember being really frustrated in 2009, 2010 were tough seasons for me, but I was pretty old then. So, even when you're just so hardcore into it, it's hard to step back and have that perspective.
When you say old, mid-30s you're talking?
Old for an elite athlete.
I see.
Like 35,
but
like in
don't
2000.
women peak later?
I think, and I think a lot of that depends on your perspective. So like 2 things, like right now we have a lot of women in the US who just turned 40 who are running like amazing. Wow. Like we have a couple women who are running PRs in the marathon at age 40. I would say we're really strong right now, kind of basically at the top level, and, people doing like super fun stuff like that too.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember someone that we both know, Colleen Direct. Has she won any time?
She won the trials. So we were on the Olympic team together for the marathon. Okay. And she actually won those trials. And she turned 40 later that month. So
Amazing.
But I think like also some athletes, it kind of depends on your perspective. We have a lot of both men and women. Bernard Lagat, he's in his 40s and he's still like totally, he's running, not at his best, but he's still at a very, like he won a national title this year.
Wow. And
he's over 40. So he's still at that top level. But some athletes, when they turn 30, I've talked to athletes who are like, oh, I'm old now, so I'm just going to get slower. But like, I never thought that way. And, my coaches never thought that way. The people around me never thought that way. And I actually I even ran my 800 PR when I was like 35.
Wow.
So a lot of it's, you have to train it. So you have to like believe you can still get faster. And if you, as we know, if you keep doing the same things, you're not going to get the same response. Or some people, even as they get older, they do like less of the speed work because maybe they're worried about getting injured, or they have moved up in events. They're doing more endurance, so they're doing less speed. So you still have to train it as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what I inferred from what you just said, it's really the mindset is a key point. Like if you believe I'm getting older, I'm getting slower, I'm getting whatever, I don't recover, then that will probably happen.
Then that's definitely going to happen.
It's crazy.
Exactly.
So many people. I remember growing up, being like when I was a teenager. Adults that I would be around, whatever, they'd say, oh, well, you're just a kid, you can recover. I'm getting old now. And I remember thinking, like, I never want to say that because it's just going to, it's words have meaning, right, behind them, and they carry energy with them. So that thought process has never come into your brain, or you don't let it. You don't believe
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I would say as an elite, I didn't let that come into my mind. I mean, but then I would say for an elite athlete, your late 30s is a tough time because you can still be running at a very high level, but you're not going to be quite at your best. So it's like, you know, in that world, you're seen as starting to not be quite as good anymore. And then you turn 40 and it's like you're in a new category.
Sure.
And it's like you can be running not as fast, but everything. It's like everyone
You're
thinks
40, so you're
it's
good.
whatever you do is great again. So,
Wow.
so I mean, I have felt for a couple of you know, the women a little bit younger than me, it's like your late 30s like can be tough because you're in a little bit of a weird place there. But where I was going with that was I think, you know, it comes down, you know, to your mindset, but we do age.
Right.
And so for me, it's finding that balance of realizing, you know, my 44-year-old body is certainly not my 34-year-old body, but, you know, but not like thinking about it in a negative way.
Sure.
And as we talked a little bit about earlier, for me, that was kind of a transition of how I looked at nutrition for high performance when I was like still, like at 37, I was still running at world champs and placing in the top 10 and running at a really high level. So my focus was just, it wasn't like my health 10 years, 20 years down the road. It was like, I want to run as fast as I can at this world championship.
Right.
And then as you kind of start, you know, stepping, realizing that's not quite as possible anymore, that's when for me, I was like, okay, I think I need to like look at this from more of a health perspective and see like what are things I need to change so I can, you know, continue to age well and can, yeah, hopefully continue that into your 50s, 60s and whatnot. But realizing that, no, you can't do, like this body can't do what my 34-year-old body did.
Totally. And then what you said right there, just to reinforce that, is there's a difference between sometimes optimal performance and longevity.
Right.
You know, and sometimes those can be the same, but oftentimes if you're competing at a high level, the training, the load is maybe not totally synergistic with optimal longevity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when you're an elite athlete trying to make Olympic teams, trying to run PRs, maybe set, you know, a national record, yeah, you're just dialing in, you're trying to maximize legally what your body can do at that time without, you know, you're not really worrying about down the road.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, once I turned 40, I took a much bigger interest, even though I was still competing at a high level. And okay, I want to look at nutrition as more as a whole and for my future, as opposed to just like how fast, you know, I can, because you run right now.
Mm-hmm. Is that what got you into keto a little bit?
And that was like what, right? Because I definitely,
Let me just turn this a little bit. You're good. Yeah.
you know, when I was younger, even I remember I was like, well, why? You know, I really like to eat. I enjoy food. So if I'm hungry all the time, why would I not want to eat all the time? You know, not realizing, oh, you're aging every time you eat. So just, you know, just starting to dive into that and what are the different things I can do to like slow that down maybe. So yeah, that was my interest in going more low carb. And I like, as we talked about earlier, what I noticed with myself and with some other athletes is I feel like for me, I started eating much lower carb and realized I wasn't hangry. I wasn't running around needing to eat all the time. But then when I did get, you know, ketone strips to actually test, I like wasn't most likely or most often in ketosis. But I feel like there was still a lot of benefit to what I was doing, even though, you know, I mean, there's more benefit, obviously, I mean, the biochemistry if you're burning ketones as opposed to carbs, but I felt like there was kind of a lot of benefit there, which is like, I feel like it's just a gray zone where there's not research, but I felt like it was very, very like helpful for me.
Totally. Well, it seems that ketones, especially in physically fit people, don't really get that high because your body's using them. And a lot of people don't kind of understand that the liver is making ketones when there's an excessive amount of fat that's not being utilized. Like it's kind of like a backdoor, if you will. So that's, you know, it doesn't mean that you weren't in ketosis per se, but I think, like you were saying, we don't have a lot of data in very insulin sensitive, physically
Right.
fit people about what's the optimal ratio of ketones to maybe glucose.
Right.
Yeah, so you were saying you were at an airport, you're traveling with people that weren't fat adapted.
Yeah.
And they share the story.
My husband couldn't make a trip to it was a world championship qualifying race last year. So I took a couple of the girls who were running for the BAA, you know, really young girls. And so for me, I got up early in the morning, had my bulletproof coffee. They got up, ate something real quick, and we went to the first airport. They got something else to eat, and I was just like, I'm like, okay, cool, I'm just hanging. Then we connected through San Fran, and like they rushed off to get food, and then our flight was boarding early, and I'm like in a panic because like I'm like I got to get these, like I'm doing this like I got to get these athletes here from my husband. I'm like taking over as coach this weekend, and they made the flight, but it just really kind of puts it in your face. I was like, wow, these guys, and they're young, so they're they're just like, but they're, just kind of burning through the carbs and needing to eat. And for me, like at the time, if you'd probably tested me, I probably wasn't in ketosis, but it was definitely like a huge change and a huge like shift for me.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest benefit. We get really excited about having high ketones and all that, but just kind of the food freedom. And that you don't have that ball and chain of like, oh, I got to eat in 2 hours because I'm going to get jittery and everything like that.
Because that used to be me. And when I was eating super high carb, like in college, I didn't really like the meat in the cafeteria, but I ate, like I said, I ate a lot. So I just ate a ton of carbs, but I would occasionally get those blood sugar crashes where I would get like shaky. And probably kind of hypoglycemic. So when back then I think I got a chromium picolinate supplement and
worked it through.
Yeah, exactly.
I would just have mangoes nearby and I would just have dried mangoes. I'm like, oh, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But going back to the visualization, you talked about that. I think there's this in high performers and anyone in general. Like there was a study, this book, it's called The Charisma Myth. Olivia, I can't remember her name.
I haven't read that one.
It's a good one. She highlights a study where Stanford MBA students, so these are individuals that are, out of like all these applicants, they're the top of the top. And every year they asked them to raise their hand if they felt like they got accepted as a mistake. And like 75% of the students raised their hand.
Okay.
So a lot of like people that even though they believe in themselves and all that have this imposter syndrome, and I'm sure it happens in elite athletics, and so you probably draw upon things like visualizing the race, visualizing. So what were strategies that you used so that you could overcome any like negative thoughts that came in like right before the Olympic trials? I'm sure it's very stressful. You're at the Olympics, you're like, oh my gosh, am I really here? Like, how did you visualize that? I
think somehow like intuitively I figured that out kind of as like a young college athlete. Actually what I started with, and I mean I started visualizing races, but also I got sinus infections all the time in high school, and it became like I had a really bad one, and it wasn't diagnosed, so I didn't know what it was my senior year, and they diagnosed me with asthma, but I was really struggling. So I had this full ride to Villanova, and then I was struggling to run within 20, 30 seconds of, say, my mile time, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to go. I can't show up at school like this. And then I had an X-ray and got diagnosed, and it was another sinus infection. But so I went into college with this kind of phobia of sinus infections, and I didn't really take care of myself as a freshman. I was typical train wreck of freshman, so I continued to get them my freshman year, and then my sophomore year when I pulled myself together running-wise, I would like visualize fighting off sinus infections. And knock on wood, I haven't really had one since then. So I would kind of like it, because it was just like I was doing so well running, and it was like my biggest fear of like derailment, which is obviously irrational. But at the time, I would sit in and visualize like my immune cells like killing sinus infection. Amazing. And probably around the same time, I started visualizing running well at nationals. And then I did have a good race that season. I came in second overall and helped the team win, and we weren't favored to win. So it all like came together, and kind of from then on, like when I would run in the morning by myself, I would always visualize the races I had coming up and like basically what I needed to work on. And like before the Olympic trials, I made sure to visualize probably any scenario that could happen. You know, I had to stop and I lost my shoe and I had to put it on, or, whatever strange, thing could possibly happen. But always with me actually making
succeeding.
Right, making the team. So, I mean, those were just things I would kind of do on, I never worked with a sports psych person specifically. Those are things I would just do on my own.
That's amazing. So even back when you were a freshman in college, you would visualize your immune cells like killing off these things. That is so powerful.
And I think like in one of my good friend who I had mentioned before, Deena Kastor, she would have her, we actually, we became very good friends, and she would have her little tricks like she's like, oh, on the plane, I just visualized myself in a bubble and the germs, you know what I mean?
Bouncing off.
Bouncing back off. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of our different guests over doing this for the past 4 years. Danielle Pashko, she's a model and nutritionist in New York, and she went in and got, I don't know what sort of exam it was, had like a little nodule on her breast. And so every day, like multiple times per day, she would visualize her immune system like destroying that. Like 3 months later, or maybe it was 70 days later, I don't know the amount of time, got the test and it was gone. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Amazing.
And I think people hear that and they're like, that can't be true. And obviously the mind is very powerful, and we now know through psychoneuroimmunology that our nervous system and our immune system, like they share molecular molecules and everything like that. So that visualization is, that's so cool. I'm really impressed. So maybe for someone that's new to this, they haven't done any of these visualization strategies. Would you say like 10 minutes before a meeting, or is this like in the days leading up? Like, is there a protocol?
For me, it was something maybe like, I've never really done much meditation. So like for me, probably these morning runs, that I would do on my own. Like in college, we'd meet in the afternoon as a team and you run on your own in the morning. And then like as an elite, it was kind of flip-flop, but we'd meet as a team in the morning for the big workout and run our own in the evenings. And that's when I'd be doing, this type of thing on my own. So it wasn't anything like, for me, I felt like I was I would say you're probably in some sort of meditative state, like when I was doing this. But there wasn't anything that specific. For me, it was like I was putting in this work and building this, all beforehand. So I felt prepared like when I got to the event. So I never really did all that much besides listen to music and get amped up when I got to the race. Because I felt like unless something had gone wrong, I pretty much felt like,
you had already done that work.
Exactly. For me, like the work was done, and now all I have to do is show up and run the race. Yeah.
So it was an ongoing thing. It's just part of it's integrated. Visualizing the positive outcome and all that is integrated into your training.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. So I'm just trying to like figure out maybe if we can give a tip for people, like a helpful cue. Maybe when you're driving, visualize doing well in the meeting or doing well at the gym, whatever that is.
Right.
Like think of like a repetitive thing that you do that could help you visualize.
Yeah, I would say any time that you like have a little bit to yourself, like, because I think for me that was like my, my own time, my self time. So for whatever that time is for someone else, if it's walking the dog, if it's your drive to work, kind of whatever it is when you're in that kind of state.
Yeah. I used to, for 11 years, I was in sales. And before I would go into a meeting, I would visualize the expression on the person's face and how they would feel after a successful meeting, how they would feel if we helped their business. And for a long time, it was like halfway in, like 5 years into my career, I started doing this, and everything started working much better. It was so much easier. It was like a better conversation. So this stuff is powerful. A lot of high performers like rely upon visualizing.
Right.
Do you think that, maybe you don't associate now with athletes that didn't perform very well, but do you think that what separates you from the competition, that people that maybe didn't have a career that lasted as long as you?
I think it's definitely possible. And I also think, I'm sure there were things like I could do better, because as we're talking about it, I did so many things well, but it's also like, well, could you have thought, you could have done this other thing, so it's always, I think it's subjective, but I do think that, but it comes back to belief in yourself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that made a huge difference in my career, and certainly can differentiate. But then it's also like, I'm sure there's a few things like I could do better as well.
Totally. Yeah, we all could
in
hindsight, right? What's something that you do now or that has made you successful that maybe the younger version of Jen didn't do, that you wish you would have known earlier, whether it's in your training, mindset, sleep, whatever, like if there's just one thing that, gosh dang it, I wish I would have known this when I was 21, what would it be?
For me, it would just be like letting go of a disappointment faster. Because I definitely would bounce back, but I think probably for the majority of my career, I would stay in that beating yourself up mode too long. And now I just see it's just a waste of time. It's like you can't be obviously it's not helpful to you can't be in denial of where you made the mistakes. You're never going to fix them. But I would definitely, and it was like me internal. It wasn't coming from anyone on my team, in my group. It was just me being hard on myself if I didn't achieve what I wanted to. But I see now, and is probably as I got older, but at the very end of my career, what wasted energy that is. So that's something I definitely, it's like if I'd had, instead of being down on myself for 5 or 6 days, if it had been like half a day or 1 day, like what, could I have been doing, how much better could I have trained in that time, or what could I have been doing with that energy instead of like dragging myself down. And I consider myself a pretty stable person, but that's definitely something that like I could have done better.
Yeah. And what tools do you use now to like overcome that?
I think just recognize, and I also would be maybe a little bit in denial, start with a little bit denial, not even like wanting to admit to myself where I went off track. So now I'm like, don't waste the time being in denial. And my husband, he's like a coach, elite level coach. He's very good at that. And I used to be kind of resistant, probably because we're husband and wife. I think it's easier in a purely coach athlete relationship. But he's very direct and very bring to the surface what needs to come to the surface. So I'd be a little resistant to that. And then it would just take me longer to process it. So now I just realize, that's what I tell young athletes. If you have a bad race, first of all, you're not a bad person, but let's, take an honest look at why. Don't, kind of put your head in the sand and be in denial of where it went off track. Because the sooner you just embrace it, figure out what, exactly. Take responsibility, figure out what went wrong and what you need to do, what you need to work on. And just, you don't need to be like wasting, your energy being like emotionally down, because it's just a waste.
So let it go, learn from it. A lot of people talk about like reviewing game film. Like sometimes maybe if you screwed up in a race or you did something wrong, you'd be embarrassed to rewatch that because, then the only person you can blame is yourself. But what you're saying is, and did you ever rewatch tape and think, oh, I should have done this, or I could have, was that?
Oh, I've definitely done that. Yeah. It's like you almost watching it thinking it's magic, it's going to go different this time. But I've definitely done that. But I think it's help, and it's especially helpful for athletes who, I think some athletes have a good recollection of how things went. But I've also had teammates where they made obvious mistakes, during the race, and a lot of times they're salvageable, but you say the person, lets himself get knocked to the back with a lap to go, and then they have to work their way back up, and then they finish the race, and like, what do you mean? No, I was in a good position the whole time. So it's like, let's get so it's also very, for some people that's very helpful because their recollection doesn't match the reality of what happened. So kind of reviewing that, and then it's like, oh, wow, I was back there. So next, and it helps them bring that awareness like the next time out.
Interesting. You bring up something that I wanted to ask you, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. How do you push through? I think a lot of training at a high level is mental. Everyone's lungs and legs are probably burning, right? In a marathon or a half marathon, 10K, when it's really, really tough, and you think, man, I don't know if I can go any further. How do you push through that pain?
I think it's different for different people, because for myself, I was always best focusing on competition, and for me, it'd just be focusing on where I need to be, or I have to stay here. If I can get to this point, then I can finish. And it'd be like taking it step by step, but more based off of the competition or just being competitive. There's other athletes who you just put them out there by themselves, and they can just push themselves to that level. And that wasn't me. Like if I run something solo, I'm not going to run as fast as if but some people are almost a little more comfortable, and they're just able to take themselves to that level. So I definitely feel like there's both type of athletes. And for me, it was just being competitive and focusing, so I think for me, probably focusing on the competition took me out of that I'm hurting, took me out of that pain zone, as opposed to if I'm by myself, then I am thinking more about how I'm feeling.
So you see someone else in front of you or whatever, and you're like, well, if they're doing it, I can do it, so I'm just going to suffer and push it.
Right.
Basically. Was there ever a point at the Olympics maybe or on national teams where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can hang, in competition, and you just willed yourself to the point where you did well?
When it went well, I've had definitely done both. So for me, my whole, when I came out of college, I ran the 5K in college, and I started moving up in distance. But I always, a big goal for me was always to break 15 minutes in the 5K. I ran 15:41 in college. But a buddy of mine who was a year ahead of me, she came out made the Olympic team my first year out of school, ran 14:56. So it was like that kind of gave me hope, even though I didn't have quite as much speed as her. But for me, like breaking 15 minutes was always this huge thing that I didn't really know if was attainable. And then later in my career, when I moved back down to the 5K, all of a sudden I was a lot closer than I was when I was younger. And I came close a couple times, like to breaking 15, and I had one last chance at the end of the season. And I would say that is a race where I just willed myself each K to keep going, where it came close a lot of times to going off the rails, but I willed myself to stay in there. And yeah, that was the first time I broke 15 minutes. And It was like a huge personal goal.
Yeah.
But there was other times where I would say, I was better at doing that in the shorter distances. Like I think I was able to handle like intense pain for say 8 to 15 minutes better than 30 plus. Because I had some races, I would say in the 10K where I didn't make it past those points and I should have, so.
Yeah. So if you're racing a 10K competitively, I did track and field one year and then played football the rest in high school. And my event, I did the 400 and 800 and the mile. The mile was just too much pain for me for too long.
Yeah.
So in a 10K, are you like hurting and suffering the whole time?
They're all different. It's a different level of pain. Like for me, the mile, as a distance runner, you think the mile sounds like fun until you're hurting 300 or 400 meters in and you still have like 3 laps.
Yeah.
It's like a whole different world of lactic pain. And the 10K, it would say you're kind of taking it back a notch from the 5K, but you have to grind it out twice as long. So like I would say for me, like where I was best at toughing it out was like the 3K, 5K distance. And then each distance longer, I was still good, but not quite as much.
Gosh, do you think, and I don't want to offend you with this question, but there's this idea permeating about endurance athletics that sometimes people are running from something. Like we see this in cycling and stuff like that. Do you ever feel that? Like some of the people are just, maybe it's a way of avoidance and that suffering is maybe coming from some other deeper emotional thing going on? Have you seen that?
I mean, I do think most elite athletes, I think we all have something, that's like a little off or that, that is like extra motivation. I mean, I think it's like different for everyone. Like my husband and I had talked about that. I think like for me, part of it was just like, I grew up out in the country and I wanted to just I wanted to be like in the city,
Right,
it was almost
I'm
like
going there.
I just wanted to kind of keep proving myself and keep, just proving that little girl from the country like could do it. And I think some people have more serious things that they're running from or running, motivating them. So I think like in the people I look at, it like that I've been friends with and trained with, it's all a combo. Some things are say more serious or deeply rooted than others, but everyone has like some like say chip on their shoulder, some edge that makes them a little bit, like intense.
Yeah.
For sure.
So is there like a higher prevalence of maybe childhood abuse that you found amongst runners or?
That's definitely not like,
not okay.
something I've found, but I think everyone just has that thing.
Underdog mentality.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Gosh. Now what's your plans going forward? You're going to coach?
I do some health coaching and I do some run coaching and I want to do more speaking events. So I'm basically, just kind of figuring it out. Jump in some races for fun, but do more of a mix.
I see on your Instagram, you're doing a lot more like CrossFit style working out, more weights and all that. Has resistance training been a part of your program? It's been a part of my program, like for the majority of my career since around like, I did some light stuff before 2005, but from like 2005 on. So and that's something I definitely, like I've always enjoyed that. Like a lot of like elite runners or distance runners don't really enjoy that, but I've always enjoyed doing some Olympic lifts and getting, I've always enjoyed that aspect of training. So right now I'm basically going back to work on like some mechanics to make sure I'm doing everything properly and then kind of, increase weight or
right,
whatever
and then
time.
Increase weight again.
Yeah, I found that a lot of endurance athletes are scared of resistance training for fear that they're going to bulk up and their power to weight ratio is going to be altered. But it's not that easy to build muscle anyway.
Right, exactly.
That's been your mindset.
That's definitely been my mindset, and I think although with like specifically like endurance runners, I think you want to make sure you start with the basics, though. Just like even make sure you can do a body weight squat with proper mechanics. So kind of starting, and even I tell anyone that, because I see kind of switching gears here. If you go to like a HIIT class, and it's a great workout for everyone, but it's like I don't want people to get hurt. It's like you don't want to be doing some of these exercises, just not using the right muscle groups, and then you're bound to tweak something. So like I always stress to people, like learn the basics and then kind of build up from there.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, like starting out maybe doing powerlifting classes or anything. I love the group format, like you were saying. I think it can be very motivating to see all these people doing these, but then you're doing maybe Olympic lifts with high reps or an endurance, and so then you can get in, and that's why there's this whole thing, CrossFit slop. Have you heard that term? Where people are just doing like cleans and 100 repetitions, and it's like, oh man, your form's going to go to crap over time, and that can lead to injury. So
no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think you definitely want to be careful and make sure you have like the fundamentals, and that's something like my husband is very good with mechanics, and he tries to instill in the young runners is we need to start with the basics and go from there. We can't go straight to doing the Olympic lifts if you're struggling with the general strength circuit.
Interesting. I wonder how much of running is neurologically based, like your mechanics and everything. Is that a big part of it? Like you're training your nervous system to move in a certain way? Is that?
I think so. And I think it's things that are easier to stay on top of early, is like for me, like when I kind of got to a stagnant part of my career, I realized it's like, I'm just overusing, like I've developed this kind of like not perfect like pattern, and I'm just overusing like certain muscle groups, and I'm not getting the result I want anymore. So it's like, it's easier to stay on top of those things like with younger athletes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To catch it early, snip it in the butt before it becomes interesting. Let's finish off on like what you do, say pre-training in terms of nutrition and everything along those lines. And I think a lot of people are hopping on the keto diet, which is great. We advocate that and all that. But if you were to do, let's just say, a 800-meter dash, right, or sprint, would you do that keto, or how would your pre-workout training or nutrition look like?
I would definitely have some carbs before that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely. Usually I go one of two ways in the morning. If I'm just doing an easy run, like today, I just went with the usual bulletproof coffee. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to do something more intense, then I'll have some sort of basic carb, even like bread or gluten-free bread or some oatmeal or, something with some nut butter, for a little fat and protein. But I definitely like doing a mix and having carbs before a hard effort. I've noticed for me personally, I usually do okay, like just having fats before a hard effort. What I'll notice is I'll be hungrier sooner after. Mm-hmm. So my theory is I carry a lot of muscle. I probably am just blowing through, I'm blowing through everything, and I just need to refuel sooner. But I think there is something in, I think you have that little extra when you do have carbs before a hard effort.
Totally. Me too. I think a lot of people get into this dogmatic approach, like I have to be keto no matter what, and like force it. But if performance is what you're looking for, you're talking about the mental elation and the confidence from having a good workout there's something to be said about that. Yeah.
And that's one thing I think, especially, I guess I think of it in terms of elites, but it can be with anyone is, you have that emotional reaction and connection to a good workout. So if you have carbs and you just go out and crush it, you're going to be like, oh, I ran that at the end. Mm-hmm. You can be super excited. Whereas, it's hard to make that emotional connection with, well, I did this run depleted. I didn't run that fast, but I was depleted. So actually it should be really good. Mm-hmm. It's just hard to find those connections. And I've noticed that especially with elite athletes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for a while I was trying to just be only keto with like squatting and deadlifting and all that. And my strength was going down, and I was like, man, maybe I'm getting older. Yeah. I'm 35, but since integrating more carbs around exercise, not having rice 3 times a day, strength is going up. So that adds like that confidence like you were talking about. So I think that's not talked about enough. We put, this is good, that's bad. That's the narrative that a lot of people kind of listen to. But.
Yeah. And if you're someone who's training, it's more at the elite level, but if you're training twice a day, then you definitely need to replenish the carbs before you're going out again. Yeah. So like as an elite, it would be extremely challenging to, to be like very low or no carb.
Mm-hmm. 1 meal a day.
Yeah. and I think that's another thing. Like, I haven't even done that much fasting more than 24 hours because of the cardio. Like I haven't done it, like I haven't committed to a longer fast when I'm like on a break. Mm-hmm. But for me, even at a low level of cardio, it's like, it would just make it super challenging to go more than 24 hours. But if I wasn't exercising, if I was like, I just got to do my work, I don't think it would be all that bad. Mm-hmm. But I think it makes a big difference.
Totally. No, but you hit on a great point. I mean, a lot of people are fasting for the autophagy and mitophagy and all that, but there's a lot of good research showing that exercise mimics the metabolic effects of fasting. So by just going out and doing what you're doing, you're like really mirroring that same metabolic effect that could be achieved through fasting, sure, but like you said, a 24-hour fast periodically, or compressing that feeding window.
Right.
Running low on an easy day is going to get you there, I believe. That's great. What labs? I mean, are you running serial blood work on yourself just to make sure everything's looking good?
Yes. Yeah. I've always kept pretty good track of like at least getting tested, usually 3 times a year and possibly more.
Nice.
Yeah.
So your iron, your ferritin, how have you been able to keep that going?
See, that's something I've never had a problem with. So for me, it's like getting older, it's almost like now I feel like I need to be aware that I don't have too much, because I'm one of those people that when I would go to altitude, it would for me, like low would be 60 or 70, and I'd usually be over 100. So for me, is like, since I don't train twice a day anymore, and just getting older, I want to make, like, now I'm more keeping track to make sure it doesn't jump up like too high.
Interesting.
And definitely track vitamin D. For myself, if I supplement, it pops right back up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you're out in the sun all the time. I mean, training, we were talking about that offline. Like, it seems like so interesting that...
Well, that's something I'm actually just curious about right now, because on some blood work I had done recently, it was only around 40, and I'm... I don't get over sun exposure, but I'm generally out training. Like, I'll do my run in the sun. And so, I'm kind of curious. I need to like take a dive into that, why it's, because I haven't been supplementing, but why it was like only 40.
Do you wear sunscreen?
I don't. Or I mean, if I do, it's
on your face maybe?
Yes,
or something?
I wear mineral sunscreen on my face. I figure because I'm not out, I'll put it on if I'm going to be out for an extended period. But if I'm doing 45, 50-minute run, then I generally would just put it on my face.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, you wonder unindustrialized humans, what their vitamin D is. I mean, we now know that people feel better at higher levels and things. Multiple sclerosis, autoimmune symptoms seem to kind of go away. But it's super interesting. I think I was telling you offline, I worked at a medical clinic, Gerard Guillory, and he ran blood work on, I think it was over 3,500 patients, and like all of them were very, very low. And then when they got their vitamin D levels up, they weren't sick as often, and all that. So anyway, it's super interesting to think about. But the cool thing is there's new technologies now. Like, have you heard of Soleus? It's a machine, you kind of like a tanning bed type of machine. You go in and it causes instead of like taking the vitamin D, it causes your own body to make
that's
vitamin
really
D.
cool. I actually hadn't heard of that.
Yeah. So they filter out the UVB and UVA
awesome.
rays. So it's kind of unique.
Yeah. That's cool.
So we talked about so much, Jen. Let me see if there's any questions here. And then we have 3 final questions that we like to ask every guest on the show. Chris, we got some...
Some stuff about supplements.
Someone talked about supplements. Oh, yeah. You know what? You were talking about your take branch chain amino acids during training. I would love to dive into that. Also, and so when would you use those amino acids and why?
I feel like they're good support during like interval training. And then when I'm going from there, generally I'll go from intervals, like a hard day, straight into the weight room. Occasionally we take a break. More often now, I'll just go straight in. So I feel like that's kind of sustaining me like through the workout and into the lift. And I basically got into the habit of taking those back in like 2011.
Oh, nice.
So.
And you feel like that's added a little edge for your training and recovery?
Yeah, I think so. And like I almost feel like more like neurological, almost like more mentally dialed in as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, because that's one thing I've like thought of before in terms of when I realized like, okay, I'm not yet in ketosis. When I first started testing, I'm not technically in ketosis, but I'll have times like where I feel very sharp, you know, because a lot of people you talk to when they start doing a keto diet and they're like, oh, my mental clarity is like amazing now. So for me, I was like, is there like this whole other world that I'm missing? Could I be like twice as productive as I am now? But I don't really feel like all that different. But then I'm like wondering if that's just because my diet, you know, my diet's already clean. I've taken aminos, I take acetyl-L-carnitine, like pills, 500,000 milligrams, you know, in the morning. So, a few of these things are already like dialed in.
Yeah. So your baseline's already kind of much higher compared to someone who was eating crap and then goes keto.
Because obviously, that should
Huge
make a big
shift.
difference.
Yeah. So the acetyl-L-carnitine, you take that for more mitochondrial health and to burn fat?
Yes. Yeah.
And you've been doing that for a while?
Been doing that for a while too. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you take just straight up carnitine too, or just the acetyl form?
And I just take the acetyl. Yeah. My husband will, I think, mix it up sometimes, but yeah.
What about MCT oil?
I mean, I do that in my coffee in the morning, and occasionally I'll make a shake with some additional, but like generally just a morning thing for me.
Yeah, that's what I do too. Do you find that caffeine pre-workout enhances your workout in any way? There's some ergogenic aids.
I mean, I like it. So going back to my initial hiatus from coffee. So for a long time early in my career, I went off of coffee after it relieving my cramp stitch problem. Then now, I really didn't drink. It was like a treat for me until 2011. So when I did work on my nutrition and changed the type of carbs I was eating, basically cut out dairy, which I'm back to mixing in now. But when that was, so for me, when dairy was totally cut out, I think the acidity of my body changed, and it was like all of a sudden I could handle coffee again. And I've been drinking coffee ever since then, because I do like it pre-workout or pre-race, and now I can handle it. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah. So your threshold, you shifted something around, so now you can tolerate it.
Exactly.
Which is unique. So maybe it's because sometimes people have a food sensitivity. Maybe they have a little breakout or something. They go get a food allergen test, and it will say they're allergic to coffee or whatever. So they say, oh, I'm going to cut out coffee, or I'm allergic to curcumin. I'm never going to have curcumin, but it could be something else. It's pivoting your immune system. Right, exactly. So I love that you provided that analogy that like you cleaned other things up so that you could tolerate this thing.
Right.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I know. It's also interesting.
Yeah. Great. So we have 3 final questions we ask every guest on the show, and we'll get to some of these live questions here in a minute that are popping in. But if there was one thing that you do, or your morning routine, like what's kind of the things that you do that enable you to have a successful, productive day?
I don't have a super profound morning routine. I'm actually more of a night person, which I work my best to like go to bed at a decent time. But for so many years, basically my morning routine has been getting ready to train, like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So my morning routine has kind of just been getting up and dealing with the dogs, like having my coffee, and just like usually, I mean, I don't do any like hardcore like computer work in the morning, so I'm really just kind of chilling, waking up, catching up on easy things. And that for me, it's kind of been all about getting my body ready to go, like to do a hard training. So right where I am now, since I don't do that year round, it's like some days I go and train with the team in San Diego. Other days, it's funny that it's still like my most productive time of the day. So I'll either do some work and get a lot done, and I'll even kind of, I think creativity is better. I'm just kind of like primed, ready to do whatever, or be on, say at 8:30 or 9 till like noon. Wow. So I'm kind of like in a transition there.
Yeah. Because for so long,
the routine is just get yourself physically ready to do something hard.
Yeah.
So right now it's like I'm ready to tackle whatever I need to tackle.
Conquer
that day.
the world.
But sometimes it's running, sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, but balancing that with your natural tendency, you said, to be like a night person, that's going to be tough.
Yeah,
right?
Because basically, like when I ran on the European circuit, like that was my zone, because you'd be like up till 1 or 2 in the morning, don't have to get up till like 9 or 10, and that's like where I really thrived. So now I'm able to adjust. Just for me, like I went to bed at 10:30 last night, and that was like, that's about as early as I can get. So,
interesting.
I mean, I've always like wished I could be a morning person, but so far it just hasn't like
kicked in.
And yeah, I'll still kind of get on a roll late at night, but usually I'll kind of pull myself back and not, do that. So because it is easy to get into that routine of you're either fatigued because you have to get up, or like at this point in my life now, I'm like, I feel lazy if I sleep till, if it's like I'm asleep
10.
till 8 or 9, it's like, you feel kind of weird doing that. So so I've kind of like dialed that back, but by nature, I'm like more of a night person.
Interesting. Yeah, I would have thought the opposite. It seems a lot of endurance athletic folks that I know are like naturally like early risers.
It's not me.
So cool to know that there's so many different ways to come about this. I think that's really empowering for some people. Your chronotype, right? I don't know if you've read the book. Is it Bruce? Can't remember what he's.
I've flipped through that. I haven't read the whole thing, but I know what you're. I know what you're talking about.
It came out about a year and a half ago or so. Yeah, that whole field of chronobiology and circadian rhythms is really pretty fascinating when it comes to athletics and all that. Cool. So what herb, nutrient, botanical could you never take? Like if we were to take it away from your training, that it would affect your performance. Like if you're stranded on a desert island, you could just take one thing with you. What would it be? It can be a whole food too.
Well, I would say EFAs, unless that's already.
You might have fish on the island, but so essential fatty acids have been helpful for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like as a base, like that would be the thing that I would pick as being like overall most important.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What makes you say that?
I think just because, I mean, so many different things it can do to help your health. But I mean, if I'm being totally honest, back when I met the guy we worked with, Hamish Hurley, when he's like, my husband said, if I have an athlete that can only afford one supplement, what would it be? And he said EFAs. So it's kind of, I'm stealing his thought, but it's been ingrained in me like since then. So it's like, I just think it's such a building block that's what I would go with.
Totally. Well, there's a lot of great research, particularly in athletes, and preserving lean muscle mass, accessing and the ability to oxidize fat from the adipose tissue. We were talking about Charles Poliquin, who unfortunately just passed less than a week ago, and he was huge into getting his athletes and Olympians on essential fatty acids. Just curious on the dosages that you use.
I'll mix it up by feel. It's going back to that kind of intuition thing, and for me, it also it depends on which I rotate brands, and I'll kind of just go by feel. So I don't have a specific dosage.
Okay. Before we leave, I'll give you the MYOXCIENCE monoglyceride form to see if you notice any differences there. It's a different form of the essential fats. I'd be curious to see. So kind of last question here. So you're big into health and making fitness part of a lifestyle. If you were to bump shoulders with a parliament member of another country, prime minister, president, what would you want them to know to make their populace that they're managing, governing, more healthy? Like what comes to mind is like a sweeping change that politicians of sorts can implement?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you'd implement it, but I mean, really just helping with like just everyone understand like how bad some of the things that as a whole we eat are for us, processed foods, the bad oils, because I mean, it's not just somehow creating the awareness that it needs to change. And I think a lot of dots are being connected, to different diseases, to Alzheimer's, to brain health. But if we could like just somehow make that awareness available for everyone, especially like when you're traveling and like say we both travel a lot, you go into a grocery store in a economically depressed area of the country, and it's like how you just see like I don't know how these people are gonna like kind of get that education, and when it starts so young, it's just not a good track to be on, and it's just sad. So I don't know what the solution would be, but just somehow trying to attack that and just improve that standard American diet.
Totally.
Yeah. And
let them know that it makes a big difference.
Right.
Eating that way. Yeah. Isn't it sad? Like you go like not to pick on Michigan or Detroit, but I was in Detroit, in the last year, and just finding healthy food was so challenging. I mean, you go outside of San Diego, Seattle, San Francisco, New York.
You're very spoiled.
Yeah, it's like being healthy is like almost like become this elitist,
right,
upper middle class kind of thing. And so it's which is unfortunate, right? We really need to help other people, but the access kind of sucks.
Right. I was thinking of somewhere. I was in the Midwest, and we went in to grab one thing from the grocery store, and we couldn't find. We had to leave. We just couldn't find anything to snack on. So
it's tough.
But it's like, it was in a poor area, and it's just like, but how is like, how is that going to change? Because these people can't afford different food, and this is what they have access to. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, when I travel, I just Google natural food store or co-op, and usually there is. I was in this Lafayette, Indiana. It's a college town, but I was like, there's probably no health food store here. And this cool little health food store,
Oh,
they had
that's awesome.
kombucha, they had nuts, they had everything. So it was like, there's usually an option.
There's definitely more and more of that, but
Yeah.
we definitely have, groups of people that just can't afford that. So it's just,
Totally.
just needs to be a big change.
Yeah. Well, Jen, really appreciate you coming on, sharing
Thanks for
all your
having me.
wisdom here and everything like that. So you are coaching people.
Yes.
And so if folks want to connect with you, what's the best resource?
My website is jenrhines.com, and I'm on Instagram as Jen Rhines, and Twitter is Jen_Rhines.
Okay. Is Instagram your most
Yeah,
active?
my most active is Instagram.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be updating my website in the next week or so. So that'll be
Cool.
new and fresh soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely suggest following Jen on Instagram, guys. She shares a lot of her workouts and everything along those lines, nutrition. So really appreciate you all coming on the show. Let's just see here, Jen, if we have a few questions that have come up here. So someone asked about mitochondrial supplements. We addressed the acetyl-L-carnitine. Do you take coenzyme Q10?
I don't typically know.
Okay. But do you eat meat?
Yes,
Yeah.
I eat lots of meat. Yeah, lots of meat.
Have you tried? So what are your thoughts on the carnivore diet? We kind of talked about that, but
Initially I haven't done that much reading on it. And we were watching the Joe Rogan show with Jordan Peterson, and him mentioning, that caught my attention. That how helpful that diet was for him and his daughter. So, it's not something that appeals to me, but I totally get it. Like we were talking about earlier, if you kind of need to take anything that could cause an allergy or immune reaction, or if you're just in a place where you're super sensitive to everything, I could see taking it away and then trying to add it back and see what works. But I just really enjoy vegetables, so I probably wouldn't opt for that unless I had to.
yeah. Do you know any, or have you competed against any vegan athletes?
I was thinking about that the other day, and not very much in the we talked a little bit about ultras earlier. I think it's more popular in that arena. There was one young athlete coming out of school a couple of years ago who was really promising, who was a vegan, and I was curious to see how he did. But so far, I'm not saying this because he's a vegan, but so far he's been injured. But I wanted to see, he was. He did actually look like he was thriving on the diet, so I was actually curious to see how he would do long term. So hopefully he'll be back. But
Do you know his name?
I don't want to pick on him.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask you offline.
Yeah.
Charles talked about that. Charles Poliquin. So he's had I think 18 or 32 or something like that Olympic athletes, and the ones that went to a vegan or a vegetarian vegan style diet would have higher injuries. And then when they would switch to more animal products, that went away. So.
I think that's definitely the pattern, but I feel like we're all so unique. Maybe that's why I was actually was curious, because I feel like we are all so different. I'm like, maybe it's really going to work for this guy, because that's just how he's engineered,
Built or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so we'll see. But I don't know many that, are, are strong long term.
Mm-hmm. Do you know Rich Roll?
I don't know him, but I'm familiar with him, and because he's a great example. Because when I first came across his podcast, I was like, ultra guy. I'm like, oh, plant based, and I'm like, this guy's not going to be for me. But then he's great. So I just actually thought that was really cool that he's such a good interviewer. I'm like, oh, it's everything's interesting, you know?
Oh, he's verbose and
exactly.
He's great. He's awesome. Well, Jen, thanks again for coming on the show. Thanks, as always, guys, for tuning in. If you like this, please hit that like button. Share this with a friend or family member that's active. And follow Jen over on Instagram, and we'll catch you on the next live. See you later. Right on.
All right.
That was good.
Thank you.
Great info. We still have that standby thing on there. Oh, man. Can't believe that. Cool, Jen. All right. You rocked it. It was about an hour.